Hi, everyone. My name is Malva Gasowski. I am the host of the International Parenting Summit series. This time around, I have invited once again amazing speakers from all over the world to help us understand what it means to find a successful approach to discipline our kids. Discipline, good, positive discipline means teaching our children different elements of social skills, rules, behaviors, and more. Parents are faced with these challenges connected to a child's behavior and the parents' expectations almost daily. I have taken the liberty to invite amazing panelists that will help us understand what is positive discipline and maybe even share a few tips of what can we do to implement them in our everyday life. Thank you very much to all of you speakers that have taken the time and accepted the invitation to this panel. Danielle, if I may ask you to tell me uh, a few words about yourself, as well as what does the word discipline mean in your practice?
Yeah, I would love to. I'm Danielle Bettman. I am a positive parenting coach for families with strong willed kids, age 1 to 7. And I have a podcast called Failing Motherhood as well. And for me, discipline means to teach. And I really think that the discipline is the idea of the relationship between the parent and the child being able to follow in the parent's footsteps, the example that the parent is modeling and guiding, and the parent acts as a mentor that is allowing the child to be able to create their own path and learn their own lessons, and that they're on the same team and they're solving problems together. So I really help my clients remember what the big picture is, because it's so easy to just be so frustrated with the behavior in your face in the moment, that it's helpful to remember that we're teaching skills and we're building muscles and we're adding perspective over the long run. It is a marathon, not a race or a sprint. And so we need to be teaching coping strategies, we're teaching replacement behaviors, we're instilling values through conversations, and most of that happens in the neutral moments, not the moment, of the interaction or the misbehavior or whatever, that panicked high emotion moment is. I think the harm can be when we think that that's the most influential moment and we don't have any other tools in our toolkit. So we put all that pressure on ourselves to react perfectly right after a behavior happens. And really, most of the influence is in all of the other moments that build up the relationship and the connection outside of a moment of, what do I do to handle this behavior? So much of discipline happens outside of reacting to a certain circumstance. And that's really where our influence lies, through that relationship. And when we're setting boundaries and we're guiding them to an end goal of being a really healthy grown up, then we can give ourselves more grace for how we respond in the moment of certain circumstances, and not feel like we have to create the most perfect consequence, every single time, and dole it out like cards, and play the right hand, and then we'll have the right end result. It's really less of a formula and more of a relationship.
Right. So when you say discipline, and we're talking about discipline here, we don't mean punishment. We don't mean
Right.
harming your children. We're not talking about, let me think of what other things can I take away from them in order to hurt them, harm them, or show them who's the boss. We're talking about
Right.
building relationships. We're talking about teaching. We're talking about even self-discipline as
Yeah.
well. Danny, what's your take on disciplining our children from a parental point of view? And in your practice, how do you help parents?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a mindful parenting coach. I'm also a holistic health practitioner. So a lot of what I work with families is looking at the big picture, making sure the child has healthy rhythms and routines to their day, to their week, to their month, making sure they're getting adequate sleep, optimal time zones of their sleep for their body, for their age, looking at their nutrition, making sure they're getting balanced meals, and a lot of things that need discipline nowadays can actually be either way toned down or prevented when we're setting up our child's day in this way. So that's one thing that we look at first and foremost, is how to, shape their day and really keep the big picture in mind to set them up for success. A lot of time kids are just tired, or they're having a blood sugar crash, or they're this or that. going on in their life. They're overwhelmed by, too much stimuli in a social interaction. So just looking at how we can best support them can make a huge difference in thinking, oh, my child needs a lot of discipline, right? When we set up their day like that. But then, of course, there are going to be times when our child, does something that maybe all of the markers were set up for sleep and nutrition before that, but something happens, and then we're taking a look at, was this a misbehavior or was this a mistaken behavior? And really erring on the child's side, being their advocate, being, their partner in this, and not thinking of it's us against them, but really we're their guide, we're their coach in this discipline process. And how can we set a good example for them? How can we model the way that we discipline them? What is that teaching them? So we're looking at our own selves and how we approach the misbehavior or the mistaken behavior, and we try to focus on not having a reaction, but really having a mindful response to what's happening. And that's kind of goes back to what Danielle is saying, how are we responding to them in that moment? It's being mindful about it, not just out of reactivity, but bringing this consciousness into it.
Right. We talked about last month about calming ourselves and making sure that when we're calm, we're able to handle frustration. And with discipline, I have a feeling that it's a little bit similar. It's not only their sugar crushes and their overstimulation, but sometimes our own too. Like our kids are not doing anything out of the ordinary right now. We are just tired because of lack of sleep or lack of sugar, caffeine, whatever, me time. So it's lovely that you mentioned, Danny, looking at the whole picture when it comes to the children, but we need to also look at the whole picture when it comes to even ourselves together. So thank you so very much for sharing your ideas and your tips. Over to you, Rennie, if I may ask, tell us a little bit about yourself and what is discipline in your practice and the parents that you work with?
Hi, I'm Renee Lowry. I am a family relationship coach. So I deal a lot with those families that are going through really difficult times, and they are really trying to focus on repairing that very important relationship. Another thing with families is it's one of the hardest groups to keep relationships solid for years and years. And that's because we're 3 different people, 5 different people, 2 different people, all living under the same house, sometimes 24 hours a day these days. And it's not always, you're not always able to keep this mindful attitude because, like you were saying, we are first and foremost human, right? So we have our own idiosyncrasies. Our kids have their own idiosyncrasies, and sometimes they do not mix well. They do not play well together. And so, a lot of what I do is I help people, like these ladies are brilliantly saying, keep this bigger perspective. Teach discipline, which is what it also means to me. It's teaching. We want to teach with the end result in mind. So my goal, I always say, is I'm not here to raise well-behaved children. I'm here to raise well-adjusted adults. And so these things that we get our children in trouble for when they're small like this is a lot of the skills that would make them excellent adults, but they're not acceptable in children. And so what I really try to teach my clients is that in those moments, remember that. Just even be aware of it, because you can say to that child, this is an okay behavior, just not right now. And you're not a bad person for doing this way. This is great that you want to be a leader and be independent and do your own thing, but you can't do that in a school setting, So it's just having all these conversations, and it is a lot of talking, but it's teaching with that end result in mind, helping to shape them into the grown-up person you want them to become. And that, to me, is what discipline is.
That's amazing. Taking into consideration that families are surviving through the thick and thin, and sometimes we're changing and evolving. I'm not the same person who I was 20, 30, 40 years ago even. And to be honest, I love to see how my children's personalities are shaping, and sometimes it does even require self-discipline. They need to know how to discipline themselves. So here's a alarm clock. You have to go to school for 8, figure it out, right? And make sure that they know how to self-discipline, so self-teach themselves and hold themselves accountable as well. Thank you very much. I would also like to take it over to Linda. Linda, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself as well, and tell me, how do you implement the practice of discipline working with parents in your practice?
Yes, thanks, Malva. This is a very interesting topic, and um, as a background in clinical psychology and midwifery, all of what people perceive and parents perceive as discipline has, filtered in over the years through their transgenerational patterns. So what's imprinted in us actually comes from 2 generations or so ago, usually through the mother, and it's implanted in our eggs. So we actually have it within us. We have these ideas that discipline is a negative thing and that it's punishment. Whereas these days, I like to call it positive discipline, or yes, teaching, but really getting to know yourself and your child. So when we're forming the relationships very, very early on in pregnancy, even in the early weeks after the baby's born, it's really important for parents to come together and talk about what do they value? How do they want to bring this particular baby up in the world, so that it gets through some of the conflicts and they're resolved before the baby's born. And after the baby's born, I think it's really important, not only in pregnancy, but afterwards, to speak openly to your infant. I know people think that's crazy, but your infant is actually fully developed and just needs to grow and learn. And they're only going to do that through us talking to them. So we can model, but we can also talk to them earlier about the experiences and what you would like to shape around them in their world so they are safe and protected. Something that's very important also is in pregnancy to have these ideas. And while you're holding your baby in the womb, just in these quiet, calm moments, talk to them about who you are and how you are as a mother and how you will love them and care for them, even when they're making mistakes. I don't necessarily like to call it bad behavior, but as they're learning to grow, there will be mistakes. So I'm here to help you and shape you into knowing how the world's going to work for you and how you will interact in the world. In my work as an early parenting coach, I do a lot of work with mums and their infants from newborn right up to 3 to 5 years of age. And I like to focus on the attachment. And in focusing on the attachment, we're looking at when there is a rupture in the relationship. That's what I like to call it, rather than something negative in their behavior. But it's a rupture in the relationship because the need hasn't been met. So if the parent really understands their child, takes some time to get to know them and who they are, how they live within the family, they will be able to understand whether they're more sensitive. We have a lot more highly sensitive people in the world, especially babies these days. So knowing if they are highly sensitive, say they may be seen as shy, or standing back, or overexerting themselves. If we really get to understand how they interact in the world and what sets them up to have these little ruptures, or for us, rupture with them, because we need to look after ourselves as well, then we can help repair if we know exactly how they are as a person, as a little person. So that shy child, or the child that runs away or hides behind you, or has these over stimulated moments, may be actually a highly sensitive child. So you would respond to a highly sensitive child very differently than you would to a very active child, or an extremely quiet child who prefers just to read books. So that's my take on it. And I do like to do videos with mums and their infants. So introducing play, but then also a rupture in the play, and then how they would normally repair it. And we analyze that together so that we can see all the strengths that are there, and they can identify what they would like to tweak in order to have the working relationship moving as well as it can. There's always going to be ruptures, and that's fine. It's about teaching how we can work together and repair as much as we can for future relationships that they will have.
Right. I was listening to you speak and I had a smile on my face because I was fortunate enough to carry 3 of my own children. And I remember when you just mentioned that communication with our children starts when they're very, very little, and we can do that. We can teach them there. I remember having this huge, huge belly where I felt very big, and I would tap on one side of my belly and I say, "Can you kick mama here?" And then I would have a boop, and "Can you kick mama here?" And then I would have another kick here. So yeah, I don't know if he could actually hear me, but at least the tapping was a way of communication as well with my little one. So that's the memory I had while you were talking. Thank you, Linda, for that. All right, back to disciplining, positive disciplining our children. I'll ask you, Melissa, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you work, and what does discipline mean, and how is it introduced in your practice with the parents that you work with?
Yeah, thanks, Melva. So I am a post-adoption support specialist, and I work almost exclusively with adoptive families. And so I've been talking a lot lately about the difference between strategies that are what I call top-down strategies that generally are logical, use a lot of words, versus bottom-up. And a lot of the families that I serve have kids who haven't developed a sense of true felt safety because of some of their early childhood experiences. So they don't trust caregivers and adults the way a lot of children do. And so they go through life a lot of times activated into kind of this ventral vagal activated state. And that's coming from the survival part of the brain. And so as parents, when we try to, use discipline that's logical, like if you keep doing this, then this will happen. Or even if we try to just use positive teaching discipline, that's a lot of words, like, it's not nice to, hit your friend at school, or, et cetera, et cetera. That's really missing the part of the brain where the behavior is actually developing from. And so as adoptive parents, we will do much better with our kids if we start at the foundation and then work up. And there's obviously always eventually a place for that more logical, verbal, top-down discipline. But a lot of it is recognizing the needs of our kids' nervous systems. And when we meet those needs, physically, emotionally, from a neurobiology relational perspective, then our kids settle and they know in their heads what they're supposed to be doing. I've never met a family with a child who has a repetitive, challenging behavior who, in a regulated state would say, "Oh yeah, it's fine, totally fine," to hit someone or lie or whatever. They all know the right and wrong, but they're being driven by a different part of their nervous system.
All right. So thank you for that. Just like children are driven from a different part of their nervous system, just like Melissa said, so are parents in the heat of the moment. So I'm going to ask you guys one question. I'm going to ask for a tip from each and one of you. Imagine that we are parents and we don't really want to think of strategies of discipline when we are in that heat of the moment, when we've lost our temper and we feel that, oh my goodness, I'm going to snap. That's not the best part, to think and strategize and analyze how should I react. So instead of doing that, can I ask you guys, if I have a partner, that's great, but if not, let me self-reflect. What are certain questions that I should ask myself in order to know what is my discipline teaching strategy for my family? So I will say, is it okay for me to hit? Is it okay for me to use physical contact with my child when I'm angry? My personal opinion is no. Ask yourself, because some parents still use physical contact as a way of punishment, and this is not what we would promote. So I'm going to put that aside. The big question is out there. No, we do not hit. Danny, what other question would you require or would you recommend parents to talk about when we talk about discipline strategy?
Yeah, thank you. One of the tools that I use in my coaching with the families is a thermometer. And I don't know if I've mentioned this on one of these panels before, but these are personal thermometers that we have for ourselves as parents and also for the children, where we can kind of self-reflect in the moment and figure out, how dysregulated am I? Like, how upset am I? How effective and mindful is my response going to be if I'm high on my thermometer? And so you can teach this tool to your children and also to your partner if you have one, so that you can kind of assess for each other and you can use that language when you're approaching a discipline situation. So you can say to your kid, mommy is really high, getting in the red zone on my thermometer right now. I'm going to take a minute to get back down to green, and then I'll come and work with you about this. And something like that, your partner and you can notice it for each other. So I think just being really aware of what's going on for your own nervous system, like you said, before jumping in and trying to fix it. But then something that Linda talked about is that you can always go back and have that repair, because it is hard to think on your feet in the moment when you're new to this mindful parenting stuff and when challenges are arising and you have to react and jump in there. You can always go back and have repair and conversations and heal that rupture in the relationship. The earlier the better. And even if it doesn't happen right away, the opportunity is always there. So we have people in our program that maybe their child, she's in her 20s right now, 21, and she's talking about something that happened when her daughter was 7. And so she's going back right now, her daughter's 21, and talking about that situation and how now she's able to see it from her daughter's perspective and to heal that rupture even years later. So it's never too late to implement this stuff.
Thank you very much. I have a question for you, Melissa. What kind of topic or question should partners ask each other when they're thinking about finding a strategy to discipline their kids?
Well, I always encourage parents to start with reflecting and regulating for themselves what's going on in their family, or how a behavior sits with them. What's the story we tell ourselves about it? How does it sit in our nervous system? And I think a really powerful question is, what cues safety to my nervous system, to your nervous system as a partner, to our kids' nervous systems? And answering that, if we address that first before we do any, discipline, that puts us at a really good place to not, we all mess up, but it sets us up for success. And sometimes it's really simple things. Humming cues safety to the nervous system. Cold on your face, snaps you out of an activated state. So sometimes it's really simple things we can do. Again, bottom up things, not telling ourselves we need to try harder or be more patient. That helps us stay in that regulated space.
Thank you so very much. Renee, can I ask you to help us think about what questions or what points should we reflect on as parents together with our partner? Should we have one before we think about how we should discipline and teach our children?
Well, my answer, I'd like to start with in that heat of the moment, because I teach my clients to use the strategy of empathy. And it's like in that moment, instead of reacting, like you're talking about, we would ask ourselves, how do I feel like them? When do I feel like them? Would I have wanted to react the same way? Whether you do or not's another story, but maybe you would want to. Maybe you saw that little kid just pile up and hit your son in the face and he hit him back. We might want to also hit that little kid. This is something we share with our son. Whether we're doing it or not is another story. You don't do that. And that's the lesson we teach. But you can say, hey, it's okay that you were mad. I was mad too. That's okay. We're okay being mad, but there's ways to handle being mad and there's ways not to handle being mad. And that was not one of them. Yes, he did the wrong thing. I'm right there with you. I'm not happy either, but this is where we're at. When your child does something that bothers you, a lot of times, it's because you share that same trait and they got that from you, so it frustrates you because they're so much like you in that regard. And it gets on your nerves because you can see it so clearly. It happens in my house all the time. My little mini me is, the one that makes me the most frustrated of all of my children. So this just happens. But if you can take the step back for 1 second and say, hey, do I ever feel like this kid feels right now? Yes, I do. Okay, so just start by saying, hey, I understand. I know you're upset. I would be upset too. That stops so much of their combative brain, because when you say no, when you do those sorts of things, it puts them in a fight or flight type of mode. They have to suddenly defend themselves against you. And if you empathize, if you start the whole conversation with, I feel exactly how you feel, I know exactly what you're saying. Even if you don't believe it entirely, like, I see that you are upset, I totally get that you're upset. You're with them. Even if you don't think it's right that they're upset, you're with them. And that makes them think logically, and it stops a lot of that escalation of the combativeness in any relationship. And so my go-to response for that is always empathize, 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 empathize.
Thank you so very much. Linda, how about you? What do you think partners should think about when they think about creating a strategy for teaching and disciplining their kids?
Thank you, Malva. Renee, I very much agree with what you're saying. I have a very similar practice, and compassionate early parenting is my business. So I think it's valuable for parents to have discussions about what triggers them in the moment. And usually the things that trigger them are what their parents were interrelating with them about when they were younger. So as Danny was saying, the older woman remembers how she was as a child with her mother. So looking at repairing that can happen at any time. However, we need to remind ourselves, what is our trigger? Where is it coming from? Who comes up in our mind when we feel triggered by a particular memory of a situation, or you're watching your infant doing what they're doing that you're not happy with? So once we know how we respond in those situations, and we usually respond negatively to something that we see in ourselves that we don't like. So we will react rather than respond. So having that awareness and that discussion beforehand, I think, is really valuable for parents to regulate themselves, give themselves some self-compassion for being human and having experiences. However, they turned out fine with their past experiences. So focusing on, what do you value in your family? And how can I offer this compassion towards my child and help move or shape the situation in a way that will have a more positive effect and memory that will be instilled in my infant for years to come.
Yeah, thank
Good
you.
or bad, it will still be, a growth.
Right. Thank you very much, Linda. And last but not least, Danielle, how about you? What things do you think partners, or I should discuss with myself, prior to reacting, so out of that heat of the moment situation before it happens, what kind of things do you think we should talk about, think about when it comes to discipline as a positive way of teaching our children?
Yeah, I think if you are being able to hit pause, when they're in bed, and then be able to reflect and have a conversation about it, then you are figuring out what you have control over and what you're contributing to the situation, and you're finding your power, because then you're able to problem solve and you're able to maybe get into their shoes, and you're asking yourself, what's going on here? Like, what are they really upset by? What do they need? What do I need so that I can, respond rather than react, or have more patience in the moment? And then you're able to set both of you up for success next time, because the goal is to just continually evolve the snowball momentum in the right direction so that next time continues to go better than last time. And so we don't need to ruminate and beat ourselves up for how last time went. It's much more advantageous to focus on, how can I help next time go better? And usually it's things that are proactive or preventative. So you're looking at the environment and you're trying to figure out, what could I do to help things go smoother in the morning? Could I put up a picture schedule? Could I set a timer? Could I set things out the night before? Like, that's where you're really going to have the most influence on being able to see things find their rhythm and become more smooth. And that's going to benefit your relationship because you're going to feel better about how things are going. And that's really where the problem solving, like the heart of it lies, is what can we do before that happens again to help that go differently. And a lot of those conversations you can circle back with the child and talk to them about, okay, this is what I saw happening. This is what you were thinking. This is what the problem is. How can we solve this problem next time? What options do we have? And you're showing them that you are on their team. You are their biggest fan. Like you want what's best for them. And there's just a problem that you're both trying to solve together rather than feeling like it's just me versus you. And, we're pulling away from each other in the tug of war of power struggles. So most of my clients are stuck in a cycle of threats and bribes and don't feel like they're getting any cooperation one way or the other unless they dangle a carrot, and still that doesn't work sometimes. And really it comes down to figuring out what is the deeper rooted issue of this disconnect of why they're not cooperating in the moment of whatever it needs to get done, and then seeing what we could do preventatively or proactively to help that situation run smoother next time.
Right, very true. Not so recent studies show actually that there is a very big correlation between lack of inner motivation to do things if we dangle a carrot or show a stick. Okay, so unless you have repetitive work in a factory, put on the cap on a toothpaste or cap on a marker, and that's how your children should be working as well. So just putting 2 blocks together and that's the only thing they got to do all day, then carrot and stick will work. But anything else, creative, problem solving, running around and free play, carrot and stick motivating factors don't work. So again, trying to build that inner motivation through self-discipline and teaching and understanding what the functionality of our family is and what systems we have in play is what we're going to teach in this summit. Once again, thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you very much to the experts. I am excited to have this topic out there in the open. My goal is to sprinkle a little bit of positive parenting and positive understanding of the word discipline, which means teaching our children and ourselves. It is an amazing experience for you to go through the different workshops and see what kind of elements of positive discipline you would like to implement into your home, as well as think about a reflective approach as to what kind of things I can implement, change, alter, or even eliminate. International Parenting Summit Series, Finding a Successful Approach to Disciplining Our Kids, going live this weekend. Take care, everyone.